The day I discovered the betrayal wasn't when they demanded my money. It was when I realized they'd been planning it all along. I married Julian 3 years ago. I was 26 at the time, working as a forensic accountant for high-profile criminal cases, the kind where millions disappear into offshore accounts, and I was tasked with following the money trail. Ironic, considering how blind I was to the scheme unfolding in my own home. Julian wasn't nearly as successful. He was a self-proclaimed tech visionary with grand ideas but hollow execution. Always pitching the next revolutionary app or platform that would disrupt industries, speaking with such conviction that venture capitalists would occasionally throw seed money his way, which inevitably evaporated like morning dew under a scorching sun. I believed in him initially. I thought he just needed time, resources, the right connections. Turns out what he needed was a permanent sponsor, and I was naive enough to volunteer for the position. For 3 years, I shouldered our financial reality, the renovated brownstone in Westcliff Heights, the artisanal groceries he insisted upon, the premium health insurance because entrepreneurs need peak performance bodies, according to Julian. All of me. Julian contributed when the mood struck him, which was about as predictable as winning the lottery. His mother, Vivian, always crafted elaborate justifications for him. He's nurturing his creative genius, or some visionaries take longer to manifest their potential, or my personal favorite, a truly supportive partner understands the investment in greatness. I thought it was temporary. I thought eventually he would ground his ambitions with actual work. I was catastrophically wrong. One crisp autumn evening, Julian announced that Vivian had summoned us to the family estate for an important financial discussion. I assumed it concerned his latest depleted investment, which happened with clockwork regularity. Perhaps she wanted to brainstorm legitimate funding sources for his newest digital mirage. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. We arrived at Vivian's sprawling Tudor revival home in Oak Ridge Estates to find the entire dynasty assembled like a board of directors. His father, Harrison, a retired judge with perpetually disappointed eyes, his brothers Elliot and Nathan, both successful surgeons, their impeccably dressed wives, even Vivian's sister, Beatrice, who had flown in from Geneva. Everyone sat arranged in the grand parlor beneath crystal chandeliers, expressions solemn as if preparing for a state funeral. I took my place beside Julian on an antique love seat. He seemed strangely calm, perhaps even satisfied. Vivian stood, smoothing her silk blouse, hands clasped like a CEO about to announce a hostile takeover. Ariel, she began, my name sounding like an accusation in her cultivated tone, now that you've joined our family, it's time to formalize your contribution. Half your salary, monthly, transferred to the family account. Just like that. As if announcing the weather. I laughed, a genuine, startled sound that shattered the room's somber atmosphere. Surely this was some elaborate, tasteless joke. It wasn't. It's only fair, Harrison intoned, adjusting his gold cufflinks. The Blackwood family operates as a collective. We share our resources. And currently, you possess more than the rest of us combined. You can't possibly be serious, I said, scanning the room. You want me to surrender half my income to you? Every month? Just hand it over? Vivian smiled with the cold precision of a guillotine blade. We're family now, darling. Family supports each other. I turned to Elliot and Nathan. And you too? What are you contributing to? Elliot smirked. My practice is reinvesting all profits this quarter. Nathan wouldn't even meet my gaze. I pivoted toward Julian. And you? Are you also contributing half of whatever meager sum you bring in? The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian sighed theatrically. Ariel, dear, you earn more than enough to support the collective. We've nurtured Julian his entire life, and now it's your responsibility to contribute to that legacy. We are a unit, an alliance. We protect our own. Nurtured Julian, I repeated slowly, the words tasting bitter. You mean you've enabled his perpetual adolescence? Julian seized my hand, his grip painfully tight, eyes pleading, don't humiliate me here. Look, he whispered, it's just money, Ari. You still keep half. And there it was, the revelation. This wasn't an impromptu demand. This was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan, and I was the mark who had fallen for it. I stood, retrieving my designer handbag, the only luxury I'd allowed myself after a particularly brutal embezzlement case, and smiled with newfound clarity. "Well then," I said, voice steady as a surgeon's hand, "you won't mind if I stop working altogether. If my money is our money, then I should have equal say in its allocation. And I say I'm finished." The room transformed into a gallery of stunned expressions, as if I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "You wouldn't dare," Vivian hissed, her aristocratic composure fracturing. "You're being absurd," Julian stammered, color draining from his face. Nathan chuckled nervously. "Come on, don't be so dramatic." I turned to Vivian, maintaining perfect eye contact. "Do you hear yourselves? This isn't a request for help during hardship. This is a demand that I become your personal trust fund." Vivian's facade collapsed entirely. "You ungrateful little." I walked out, the heavy oak door closing behind me with dignified finality. Julian pursued me onto the manicured grounds. "Have you completely lost your mind?" he demanded, gripping my arm. "You expect me to surrender half my income like I owe you? Like I owe them?" I countered, wrenching free. "This is about family," he insisted, as if invoking some mystical covenant. "No, Julian. This is about control. It's about you wanting to maintain your lifestyle without the inconvenience of earning it, while I finance your entire family's comfortable existence. And I am emphatically finished." Julian ran his fingers through his artfully tousled hair. "Look, Ari, I know this seems—" "No more Ari," I interrupted. "You've just revealed exactly where I rank in this family. I'm not a wife, I'm a revenue stream." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I crossed my arms. "Would you have disclosed this charming arrangement if I earned minimum wage? If I struggled financially?" His silence was the only confession I needed. I didn't return home with him. Instead, I drove to Lena's apartment in Riverview, my oldest friend from forensic school, who had warned me about Julian's entrepreneurial spirit from the beginning. That night, staring at her guest room ceiling, the full picture crystallized with merciless clarity. This wasn't spontaneous. There had been countless warnings: Julian's resistance to pursuing stable employment, Vivian's subtle remarks about successful women lifting up their partners, the way Julian defended his family's outrageous behavior, the calculated compliments about my impressive financial instincts. They had been grooming me for this exact scenario, believing I would simply acquiesce to becoming their perpetual source of wealth. Never again. I awoke the next morning in Lena's spare bedroom, feeling as though I'd been struck by lightning. My phone overflowed with notifications: 14 missed calls from Julian, 7 from Vivian, and a progression of text messages that evolved from placating, "Let's talk this through," to outright intimidation, "You've made a serious mistake." I ignored them all. I wasn't prepared to engage until I had formulated a strategy. I went to work as if my personal life wasn't disintegrating behind the scenes. There was something surreal about analyzing money laundering schemes while my marriage collapsed like a house of cards. By noon, a new message from Julian appeared: "If you don't come home tonight, I'm removing your possessions." So we were resorting to juvenile tactics now? I replied coolly, "Feel free. Just don't touch anything I purchased." Shouldn't be difficult, considering I acquired approximately 95% of our household contents. Silence. An hour later: "You're being irrational. We need to discuss this like adults." No, we didn't. I left him to read. That evening, I checked into the Harborview Hotel downtown. Sitting on the pristine king-sized bed, scrolling through messages, I contemplated my options. Option 1, return, attempt reconciliation, and try to salvage what was clearly an orchestrated fraud disguised as a marriage. Option 2, pack my belongings, disappear, and reconstruct my life from scratch. Or option 3, make them profoundly regret ever mistaking my kindness for weakness. I think you can guess which path I chose. The following day, I arrived at our apartment while Julian was giving another futile pitch to potential investors. First, I changed the locks. Then, drawing on my professional skills, I meticulously documented every financial transaction from our relationship: rent payments, furniture purchases, vehicle insurance, utility bills, even the exorbitant Wi-Fi package Julian insisted was essential for his digital empire. By the time I finished, I had compiled an exhaustive inventory of my financial contributions and what was rightfully mine. Julian returned at 6 p.m. sharp. His key turned uselessly in the lock. I opened the door just enough to frame my face, enjoying his expression of disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "My name is on the lease. I pay for this apartment," I stated calmly. "If you wish to enter, you may request permission. Or better yet, secure your own accommodations." His face flushed crimson. "You've lost your mind." "No, Julian. I've simply lost my tolerance for exploitation. There's a significant difference." He shoved against the door, attempting to force his way inside, but my precaution was waiting. Lena stepped into view, 6 feet of former military intelligence, built like she could bench press a small car, with a smile that promised consequences. "I'd reconsider that approach," she advised mildly, crossing her arms. Julian froze, suddenly recognizing the shift in power dynamics. Lena's smile widened slightly. "We're here to collect Ariel's possessions. You know, the ones she actually paid for." Julian looked ready to spontaneously combust. "You're destroying everything." "No," I corrected him. "You accomplished that entirely on your own." As expected, Vivian inserted herself into the situation with immediate effect. She called that night, her voice reaching frequencies that could shatter crystal. "You locked my son out of his own residence." "I secured my property," I countered. "You're systematically dismantling this family." Interesting perspective. I thought this family was fundamentally about mutual support. "Where exactly is my support, Vivian? You ungrateful little." I ended the call. The following morning brought a pseudo-legal email from Vivian, clearly composed after a frantic internet search for intimidating legal terminology. It claimed I was illegally withholding financial contributions from my spouse, constituting financial abuse, and threatened legal consequences if I didn't immediately remit required familial support. I forwarded it to my actual attorney, who replied with delightful brevity, "This document contains no legal merit whatsoever. Disregard entirely." I did precisely that. But I recognized this was merely the opening salvo. Vivian was cornered, and desperate individuals resort to desperate measures. A week later, my bank's fraud department contacted me. "We've flagged an unusual transaction on your joint account." "I don't maintain any joint accounts," I replied, my stomach contracting. "There's an account under Julian Blackwood's name where your direct deposit is received. Someone just attempted to withdraw $5,000. My blood turned to ice. That manipulative, thieving parasite. I went directly to the financial institution. Julian had somehow redirected my payroll deposits to his personal account without authorization. The bank manager studied the documentation with growing concern. "Can you verify you didn't authorize this arrangement?" I presented irrefutable evidence: emails, digital timestamps, security protocols. Julian had absolutely no legitimate access to my employment accounts. There was no authorization on record. "Would you like to report this as identity theft?" the manager inquired. I smiled with grim satisfaction. "Absolutely." When Julian discovered I had frozen the account and initiated fraud proceedings, he unraveled completely. "You've completely ruined me." "No, Julian. You ruined yourself the moment you decided theft was an acceptable alternative to honest work." Then came his final, pathetic gambit: "I love you. We can fix this. You systematically stole from me. You encouraged your family to treat me like an inexhaustible resource rather than a human being. There is nothing remaining to salvage." After filing the fraud claim, I severed all financial connections with Julian, new bank accounts established, credit cards secured, payroll destination reconfigured. Julian was officially on his own, precisely where he had never been before. I anticipated further communication, perhaps escalating threats or emotional manipulation. What I didn't expect was what arrived next. 1 week after cutting Julian off completely, I received an official-looking envelope. Inside were divorce papers, but something seemed profoundly wrong. First, I hadn't initiated divorce proceedings yet. Second, the documents outlined a financial settlement I had never even contemplated: monthly spousal support of $2,500, continuing health coverage, and surrender of 50% of my accumulated savings. I studied these papers with increasing disbelief. No legitimate attorney would draft such a blatantly one-sided agreement. Unless Julian and Vivian had fabricated them entirely. I contacted the courthouse directly. There was no record of any divorce filing. They had actually forged legal documents. I texted Julian, impressive attempt. Your counterfeit papers lack only legal standing. No response. I delivered the falsified documents to my attorney, who couldn't contain his astonishment. This isn't merely fraudulent, it's criminal. Did they genuinely believe you wouldn't verify the authenticity? Apparently, they did. With my attorney's guidance, I filed a lawsuit against Julian and Vivian for fraud and attempted financial coercion, fraud for falsifying legal documentation, coercion for attempting to extract money through deception. I also submitted a separate criminal complaint. Julian wasn't merely entitled, he was actively criminal. Vivian wasn't simply controlling, she was an accomplice to fraud. They believed they could ensnare me in their scheme. Instead, they had maneuvered themselves into an inescapable corner. 2 weeks later, Julian called in obvious panic. You need to withdraw the charges immediately. Why would I possibly do that? Law enforcement officers came to my workplace. They questioned me in front of potential investors. Perhaps you should have considered potential consequences before committing documented fraud. Julian had never confronted genuine repercussions before. Vivian had always insulated him from the natural results of his actions. But this time, no one could extract him from his self-created disaster. Vivian attempted intervention. She appeared at my office building, creating a scene in the lobby, screaming about my vindictive destruction of her son's future. Security personnel had to physically remove her. Her parting declaration before being escorted out: "You will profoundly regret this decision." She was absolutely correct, but not in the way she imagined. Because her next action irreversibly altered everything. A week after her public meltdown, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Julian's property manager. I'm contacting you because my understanding is that you were financially responsible for Mr. Blackwood's rental obligations. No, I wasn't. That's peculiar. Your name is listed as guarantor on his lease agreement. My blood pressure spiked. I had never signed anything regarding Julian's separate apartment, which meant either he or Vivian had forged my signature yet again. I requested the property manager to forward a copy of the lease. Sure enough, my signature appeared on the document. But it wasn't mine. Vivian had counterfeited it. This wasn't merely fraud anymore, this was systematic identity theft. At this juncture, I possessed sufficient evidence to completely destroy them. I filed another police report. Vivian received a formal visit from law enforcement. This time, she didn't storm my workplace or issue threats. She maintained absolute silence. Why? Because she finally recognized she had engineered her own downfall. And I was perfectly content to watch her face the consequences. Julian eventually crumbled. Late one night, a message arrived from an unrecognized number: "I'm sorry." For what specifically? I replied. Everything. I stared at those 9 letters on my screen. I should have felt something: vindication, satisfaction, perhaps even residual affection. But I felt nothing. Because I recognized this wasn't genuine remorse for his actions. Julian was sorry he had been caught. And I was finally liberated. Following Julian's hollow attempt at apology, I knew the endgame was approaching. The fraud charges against him and Vivian were under active investigation. Law enforcement had questioned them extensively, and their situation appeared increasingly dire. Vivian, who had manipulated everyone in her orbit for decades, was now desperately scrambling. Her carefully constructed empire of control was collapsing around her. And Julian was unraveling completely. Then came the revelation that changed everything. One evening while reviewing case files, a new email appeared in my inbox. Subject line, urgent, you need to see this. It was from a woman named Sophia. I don't know if you remember me, but I dated Julian 2 years ago. I just learned about current events, and believe you need this information immediately. Attached were multiple screenshots, conversations between Julian and Vivian discussing the plan, bank statements showing transfers labeled Mom, Strategy Investment, falsified documents bearing my forged signature, and most damning of all, a contract with my name on it, committing to financially support Vivian for 5 years, dated 3 months before Julian and I were even married. I wasn't a wife. I was a calculated investment with a predetermined return schedule. I didn't message Julian. I didn't call. I drove directly to Vivian's estate. When she opened the door, her practiced smile evaporated instantly. You need to leave immediately. I stepped inside anyway. Perhaps you'd care to explain this? I said, displaying my phone screen. Her eyes darted to the evidence, the messages, the contract, the comprehensive proof. She visibly swallowed. For the first time in our acquaintance, Vivian appeared genuinely unsettled. I don't know what you believe you've discovered, but... Abandon the pretense, Vivian, I interrupted sharply. You orchestrated this entire scenario before we were even married. You were systematically positioning me to finance your dysfunctional family. She began to formulate a denial when Julian entered the room. His face blanched when he saw me. What's happening? He asked nervously. Ask your mother, I replied, still displaying the screen. He glanced at the evidence, and his entire body tensed. Caught. Vivian attempted recovery. That's outdated material. You're misinterpreting. It's precisely what it appears to be, I stated, my voice rising. You know it. I know it. And now everyone will know it. I turned to Julian. You were aware? You deliberately participated? He couldn't even maintain eye contact. Say it, I demanded. Tell me directly that you didn't know. His continuing silence provided all necessary confirmation. You're not merely a liar, Julian. You're a fraudster. A confident man. A complete coward. My voice trembled with fury. I spent years believing you were simply directionless. That you were searching for purpose. But no. You knew exactly what you were doing all along. He finally erupted. What choice did I have? Julian shouted. You had everything, professional success, financial security. Mother was struggling. I had nothing. So rather than behaving like an adult and creating your own success, you decided to appropriate mine. Vivian inserted herself between us. Don't speak to him that way. He is your husband. Not anymore. She froze. What? I'm finished. I've already initiated legitimate divorce proceedings. I'm reclaiming everything that rightfully belongs to me. And after this fraud investigation concludes, you and your precious son can face the consequences together. Vivian screamed incoherently. Julian pleaded pathetically. But I walked away and never looked back. Several weeks later, the fraud investigation concluded. Julian was formally charged with identity theft and fraud. He received probation and a permanent criminal record, effectively destroying his chances of legitimate employment. Vivian was financially penalized for document forgery. She attempted to contest the charges in court, but the judge easily penetrated her fabrications. Their carefully constructed dynasty disintegrated. Elliot and Nathan, who had always derived amusement from my expense, abandoned Julian when he could no longer exploit my resources. The entire illusion of family unity collapsed when there was no more blood money to extract. And me? I flourished. I secured a more prestigious position with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I relocated to a stunning apartment in Monaco Heights without a single parasitic attachment. I eventually met someone authentic, someone who genuinely values partnership rather than exploitation. The most satisfying element? I never had to interact with any of them again. Sometimes I wonder if Julian ever truly understood what he sacrificed, not just financial stability, but the possibility of genuine connection. Then I remember that people who view others as resources rather than individuals are incapable of authentic relationships. You can't forge real love with counterfeit intentions.